In the year 2006, beneath the sun-baked soil of Nuovo Lazzaretto, an isolated island in the Venetian lagoon, archaeologists unearthed a nightmare. They found the skeleton of a woman. Her jaw was broken. Her mouth was forced open. A heavy, jagged limestone brick had been violently rammed deep between her teeth. She was not a vampire. She was a victim of the Bubonic Plague, and that brutalized stone was not a weapon of murder. It was a desperate, terrifying technology used by the living. You think ancient humans just prayed during a pandemic? You think they merely huddled in cold churches, clutching rosaries, waiting for divine intervention? You are entirely wrong. They did not just pray. They panicked. They mutated. They abandoned every shred of their humanity to preserve their biology. When an invisible killer strikes, the human brain cannot process the abstract. It demands a face. It demands a physical enemy to destroy. If it cannot find the microscopic germ, it will destroy the human host. You might ask yourself, they were uneducated, they did not know about germ theory or virology. Does their ignorance not excuse their extreme actions? Does ignorance excuse absolute, systematic cruelty? Let us examine the architecture of ancient survival. We will deconstruct the human response to biological annihilation through three distinct, terrifying phases. This is the blueprint of human panic. This is the anatomy of a species, driven mad by invisible death. Phase 1. The Draconian Containment. The year is 1347. The Black Death sweeps across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. 50 million dead, more than a third of the continent's population wiped out. The air is thick, with the putrid stench of rotting flesh, burning pine, and stale vinegar. Authorities realized very quickly that the disease was spreading through contact, but they did not have hazmat suits. They did not have sophisticated quarantine facilities. They had bricks, and they had mortar. In cities like Milan, the response was swift and merciless. When a single member of a household showed the dark, swollen buboes on their neck or groin, the city guards did not take them to a hospital. They came in the dead of night. They did not offer medicine. They built tombs for the living. City officials ordered the doors and ground floor windows of the infected houses to be entirely bricked up and sealed from the outside. They walled in the sick. They walled in the dying. They walled in the perfectly healthy children who just happened to be in the same room. Entire families were left in absolute darkness, trapped inside their own homes, left to slowly starve to death or succumb to the pestilence. Their frantic screams echoed through the cobblestone streets, muffled by thick layers of stone and plaster. The authorities chose the absolute sacrifice of the few for the theoretical survival of the many. It was a cold, calculated, biological mathematics, but what happens when walling up the sick is not enough? What happens when the death toll continues to rise, the graves overflow, and the human mind fractures under the crushing weight of incomprehensible grief? Phase 2. The psychological purge. When physical barriers failed to stop the microscopic invader, ancient humans turned to psychological scapegoating. Fear demands a target. If the plague was a punishment, someone had to be responsible for bringing it. The terrified masses began looking for the enemy within. They stopped fighting the disease and started fighting their neighbors. They hunted the marginalized. They hunted the foreigners. They hunted those who practiced different religions. In the year 1349, paranoia reached a fever pitch in the city of Strasbourg. A vicious, unfounded rumor spread like wildfire. The Jewish population was deliberately poisoning the town's water wells to destroy the Christian world. There was zero evidence. There was no proof, but terrified people do not require evidence. They require a target. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1349, the citizens of Strasbourg rounded up 2,000 Jewish men, women, and children. They did not banish them. They did not imprison them. They built a massive wooden platform. In the city's cemetery, they herded all 2,000 innocent people onto the platform and burned them alive. In a colossal, horrific inferno, the ashes fell over the city like dark, cursed snow. Those who tried to escape the flames were beaten to death in the streets. The pandemic had successfully weaponized human fear, turning regular bakers, blacksmiths, and farmers into indiscriminate, cold-blooded murderers The virus did not need to kill the entire population. It simply watched as humanity tore itself apart from the inside. How far would you go to protect your family from an unstoppable plague? Would you turn a blind eye to the massacre of innocents if it promised you a false sense of security? Phase 3. The necrological warfare. The paranoia did not stop with the living. It extended into the grave. When you do not understand the pathology of a disease, death is not the end of the threat. It is merely a transition. We return to the Venetian island of Nuovo Lazzaretto. We return to the woman with the brick violently jammed into her mouth. During massive pandemics, graves were shallow, mass pits were dug hastily, bodies bloated and purged gases. The burial shrouds covering the faces of the dead would often tear or dissolve due to the acidic fluids leaking from the corpses' mouths. When terrified gravediggers reopened these pits to dump more bodies, they saw the shredded cloth. They heard the escaping gases hiss from the decaying vocal cords. Their traumatized, uneducated minds created a horrific mythology. The Noxer, the Shroud Eater, they believed the plague victims were demonic entities, undead creatures that remained semi-alive in the soil. They believed these corpses lay in the darkness, systematically chewing through their linen shrouds, sucking the life force from surviving family members above ground, and emitting a toxic, invisible miasma that spread the plague. To combat this imaginary necromancy, ancient humans initiated post-mortem mutilation. They systematically hunted the dead. When they found a corpse they suspected to be a shroud eater, they enacted brutal, unforgiving protocols. They smashed their jaws with hammers. They severed their limbs with heavy axe. They drove iron stakes through their chest cavities, and in the most extreme cases, they forced immense, heavy bricks into the mouths of the rotting corpses to permanently immobilize their jaws. They were fighting a microscopic bacterium with medieval masonry. It was a tragic, gruesome display of absolute psychological desperation. The disease had entirely broken their perception of reality. They were no longer fighting an illness. They were waging a physical war against the very concept of death itself. Conclusion: we look back at these ancient humans with absolute judgment. We view their bricked up doors, their burning pyres, and their mutilated corpses as the tragic consequences of a primitive, uneducated era. We believe our modern science, our sterilized hospitals, and our advanced vaccines have elevated us above this raw, primal savagery. We believe that we are civilized. We believe that human nature has fundamentally evolved. But has it? When the next pandemic arrives, not a manageable virus, but a true, unstoppable biological reaper with a 90% mortality rate. How long will our fragile illusion of civilization hold? When the hospitals collapse, when the food supply chains shatter, and when the death toll climbs into the hundreds of millions, what will happen to our modern morality? Look at the bricks in their mouths. Look at the charred ashes of Strasbourg. Now, look closely at yourself in the mirror. If the invisible killer enters your city tomorrow, if it sweeps through your neighborhood and begins systematically taking everything you love, how long before you lock the door on your neighbor? How long before you start hunting for a scapegoat? In the streets. How long before you pick up the brick